Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this virtual meeting of the Scottish Parliament. And the first item of business is portfolio questions. If you would like to ask a question within the portfolio that's under discussion, would you please put R in the chat box, please? And the first portfolio is health and sport. And question number 1 is Shona Robison.
Thank you. To ask the Scottish Government what consideration it's giving to measures to encourage increased physical activity and participation in sport in the light of the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on people's health.
Marie Goujon.
Being physically active is all the more important during the COVID-19 pandemic because we know that there are significant benefits for both physical and mental health at a time when these are definitely most needed. Now, we've worked closely in partnership with Sport Scotland to support the sporting sector throughout the pandemic, enabling sporting organisations to get access to financial support and also to help develop COVID-safe sport-specific guidance. And that's enabled a large number of sports to continue to operate in communities across Scotland within the overall set of restrictions that are in place at any given time. And we're now working with partners on further plans to ensure physical activity is a key part of Scotland's recovery from the pandemic.
Shona Robson.
Can I thank the Minister for that answer? As she'll know, to be successful, any measures will rely, and rightly so, on the knowledge and expertise of local organisations for their delivery. Organisations such as Showcase the Street in my constituency and the work that they do to promote physical activity through dance to a variety of age groups. So can the Minister say what support the Scottish Government can give to organisations like Showcase the Street and how it intends to ensure the views of such organisations are captured on what they believe is essential in the recovery from this pandemic?
Marie Goujon.
The member is absolutely right in terms of what she said about the importance of initiatives like Showcase the Street. And they're all the more important because they're rooted in local communities and they really try and work with them to try and achieve that positive change. And they're absolutely vital in encouraging and supporting young people in Scotland to really try and be as active as they possibly can be. Now, the work that both initiatives like Showcase the Street are doing and other groups like them will be all the more important as Scotland recovers from the impacts of the pandemic. So I'm really keen to engage with them, and I would be keen to hear the views of Showcase the Street on what work they see as important in supporting them to continue the valuable work that they're doing. So I hope that Shona Robison will certainly encourage Showcase the Street to contact me, and I would be more than happy to listen to their views and discuss this further with them.
Short supplementary, please, from Brian Whittle.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. A recent report to the Health and Sport Committee showed that 75% of people have reduced or significantly reduced their physical activity during COVID, and we've lost a whole year of recruitment for youngsters into sport. It will take planning and resource to rectify that. So can I ask the Minister what the Government is doing to ensure that that planning and resource is in place?
Marie Goujon.
The member raises an absolutely vital point, and it's obviously something that we're really cognizant of. And as I've just said in my previous response there, physical activity and trying to do what we can to encourage that is going to be absolutely vital as we come out of the pandemic. So I would just assure him that these are discussions that are ongoing at the moment. They were discussing with Sport Scotland too to look at what work we can do in this area, because we want people to do what they can to be physically active at the moment, which I know is obviously difficult with the restrictions that we have in place, but whether that's even just taking a few minutes to go for a wee walk outside while they can. But that is going to be a key focus for us as we transition through and out of the pandemic, and will be a key focus of my work.
Unless we have shorter questions and answers, we're not going to get through all the questions. Question number 2, Jamie Halcrow-Johnson.
To ask the Scottish Government whether it will provide a detailed timeline for the publication of the successor plan to the 2014 Heart Disease Improvement Plan.
Marie Goujon.
Work on a refreshed heart disease improvement plan is underway, and we expect to publish it in spring this year. And we recognise that engagement with key stakeholders, including people living with heart disease, is vital in getting the priorities and actions right within the plan, and that engagement work will be commencing shortly. And that will enable us to work collaboratively to minimise preventable heart disease, and to ensure that everyone with suspected heart disease in Scotland has timely and equitable access to diagnosis, treatment and care that supports them in living well with their condition.
Jamie Halcrow-Johnson.
Can I thank the Minister for that answer? There are around 68,000 people across my Highlands and Islands region living with heart and circulatory disease. It's a major health issue for many, and one I've raised with ministers previously. And can I welcome the recent publication of the BHS draft strategy developed in partnership with clinical and patient community. I was surprised to note that the Scottish Government spent only £1 million on the implementation plan of the 2014 Heart Disease Improvement Plan, but committed £17 million and £42 million to cancer and diabetes strategies. So given that nearly a third of deaths in Scotland are as a result of heart and circulatory disease, and over 700,000 people live with the daily effects of the condition, will the Minister commit to resourcing a successor plan for heart disease to comparable levels?
Marie Goujon.
I would just say to the member that as part of our work to refresh the Heart Disease Improvement Plan, we're working to understand the funding that will be required to deliver against the actions that will be contained within our plan, so that will very much be a part of our ongoing work.
Question number 3, Ruth Maguire.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government what action it's taken to ensure the Test and Protect system is accessible to all.
Marie Goujon.
The accessibility of testing is a key priority for Test and Protect, and our testing strategy and expansion plans highlight our approach to prioritising testing for different groups of people. And we've worked with health boards as well as with local authorities to plan the locations of walk-through local test sites. And that's particularly for in areas where people may not have access to a car, and we've ensured that the needs of different groups with protected characteristics are met via the testing system and through different testing routes. Now, these sites have disabled access routes. They can accommodate families and those who might require privacy while being tested, and they can be adapted to local community needs by providing instructions in languages other than English. And as well as that, to enable self-isolation, we provide practical and financial support to those who require it through the National Assistance Helpline and through outbound calls from local authorities to really try and reach those who would otherwise not receive the support that they might require to self-isolate.
Ruth Maguire.
I appreciate that answer from the Minister. I've had a constituency issue where the individual had no email address, no internet access on their phone and was unable to obtain a test. I have of course taken action for that person, but can the Minister comment on whether this is a gap in the system, and if not, perhaps provide information on what those who find themselves in this situation should do?
Marie Goujon.
Well, first of all, I'm just really sorry to hear about the experience that Ruth Maguire's constituent had, and obviously we recognise that, you know, internet access may be an issue for some people, and that might not be an option for them when they're trying to book a test. So I think in the first instance, I think in cases like that, people should call the number 0300 303 2713. That's the helpline for anyone who might need assistance with booking a test, and obviously it will help to support people access a test without requiring access to the internet. But I would also say that's where our testing expansion plans are also vitally important, whether that's we're looking at what we can do in rural areas. There's pilot projects that have gone underway there. There's the walk-through test sites. We really are doing all we can to make testing as accessible for people as possible, and I hope that all these measures will prevent issues like that occurring.
Question number 4, John Mason.
To ask the Scottish Government what its position is on the recent University of Sheffield report, Interventions to Reduce the Public Health Burden of Gambling-Related Harms, which recognises that gambling should be treated as a serious public health concern.
Minister Claire Haughey.
We welcome this report from the University of Sheffield. Gambling has the potential to negatively affect physical, psychological health and the social functioning of the people who gamble, as well as others around them. In common with other compulsive and addictive behaviours, problem gambling is addressed as part of our wider health issues. Anyone who believes gambling is affecting their health or that of a loved one should consult their GP in the first instance. Out of hours, advice and support can be obtained from NHS24 or from Breathing Space. The NHS Inform website also contains advice and signposting information. Where a person with addictive or compulsive behaviours is referred to a service for treatment, it may not be a specialist gambling addiction programme. The clinical team will work with that individual to identify the issues or problems that are important to support their recovery and provide evidence-based treatment. The Scottish Government is already working with Gambling Aware and the Gambling Commission on the implementation of the Commission's national strategy to reduce gambling harms, excuse me, which was published in 2019. We are working closely with Public Health Scotland to assess existing evidence on which pathways to treatment are likely to be the most successful in Scotland, and this includes some evaluation of pathways being trialled in other nations. We are also keen to understand why some people with problematic gambling are not accessing treatment and support services.
John Mason.
Yeah, I thank the Minister for a very full answer. The report talks about both reducing demand and reducing supply. And I wonder if you can say anything about, can we do more to protect some of those who are particularly at risk, for example, children and young people?
Claire Haughey.
The Scottish Government recognises the harms related to gambling. For that reason, responsibility for tackling that rests with public health, and similar to other issues around addiction, we adopt the dual focus of reducing the burden caused to individuals and society whilst protecting children and young people from potential harm. To reduce the burden, we are implementing the Gambling Commission strategy in Scotland, which aims to restrict the levels of gambling which cause harm. And our approach to the strategy will also focus on giving children and young people more information about gambling harms through education and early intervention.
Question number 5, Angus MacDonald.
Thank you, President Officer. We ask the Scottish Government what research has been undertaken regarding the long-term impact of long COVID on Scotland's health services and whether it's considering establishing long COVID clinics.
Cabinet Secretary Jean Freeman.
Rehabilitation, clinical input and research are all critical aspects of our recovery from the impacts of COVID. And here we're prioritising 3 main areas: the delivery of a framework for supporting people through recovery and rehabilitation, the living clinical guideline for healthcare professionals, which is directly helpful to GPs and clinicians in identifying ongoing symptoms and provides a definition of best practice. And we have funded directly through our Chief Scientist's Office 4 specific rapid research projects at Scottish universities to look at the impacts, particularly in lung health, but also in other areas.
Angus MacDonald.
Okay, I thank the Cabinet Secretary for her detailed reply. Actually, since lodging this question, I've had an opportunity to discuss the issue with the Chief Executive of NHS Forth Valley, and I'm satisfied from her response and the response from the Cabinet Secretary today that the issues in hand, both locally and nationally. So, unless the Cabinet Secretary wishes to come back, I am content for you to move on, Presiding Officer.
That's very kind of you, Mr MacDonald. Jean Freeman, would you like to give a quick response?
Thanks very much, Mr MacDonald and Presiding Officer. Just to say quickly 2 things. This is a developing area of research and understanding, and so whilst we've put a number of steps in place, we continue to look at what more we need to do as the understanding of what long COVID involves grows, particularly involving those who suffer from it.
And question number 6 is Donald Cameron.
To ask the Scottish Government whether it will provide an update on the use of do not resuscitate orders during the COVID-19 pandemic.
Jean Freeman.
Thanks very much, Presiding Officer. The first important thing to say is that the COVID-19 outbreak brought about no change at all to our guidance on do not attempt cardiopulmonary resuscitation decisions. Those decisions are made by clinicians. However, if a clinician feels that a patient would not benefit from CPR as a result of their clinical circumstances, then ultimately, like other treatments, it should not be offered. However, other treatments should be provided, and of course no doctor would refuse a person's wish for CPR to be administered if there is a possibility that it would be successful. On the 10th and 17th of April, letters were issued to GPs from the Scottish Government's Chief Medical Officer, the BMA and the Royal College of General Practitioners, providing advice and support on having care planning discussions within which DNA CPR notices may be discussed if the patient raises that.
Donald Cameron.
I thank the Cabinet Secretary for that answer. However, concerns have been raised by several vulnerable people that they, having been contacted by NHS staff, felt pressurised to accept DNA CPR orders as part of their anticipatory care plan due to their vulnerability to COVID-19. And in some cases, this seems to have been added to people's plans without their knowledge or consent. So it appears that there has been a change to the use of these orders in the NHS in Scotland. And will the Cabinet Secretary therefore commit to undertaking a thorough investigation into the use of these orders during the pandemic?
Jean Freeman.
Well, I would undertake to commit to an investigation into the use of these orders in any circumstances if there is evidence that they have been used inappropriately by clinicians. So I don't know if Mr Cameron is referring to historic concerns which were looked at or current concerns, but certainly if he would care to give me detailed information on those, then I will very happily take that up with our Chief Medical Officer, remembering, of course, that these are not government decisions on whether or not these notices should be applied to a particular patient or not. They are clinical decisions, and therefore it is appropriate that if there needs to be an investigation, that would be a clinically led investigation. Very happy to look at that in any circumstances, and I wait to hear from Mr Cameron on it.
Question number 7, Liz Smith.
To ask the Scottish Government what support it is providing to curling rinks.
Marie Goujon.
The Scottish Government announced a £55 million emergency sports funding package in December last year, and Scottish ice rinks, including both skating and curling rinks, were allocated £2 million in emergency government funding as part of the sports rescue package. And that funding includes support for rinks that support Scotland's world-class curling programmes, as well as recreational and professional skating. And we're continuing to work closely with Sport Scotland and a range of Scottish governing bodies, including Scottish Curling, to fully understand the ongoing financial challenges which are being faced across the sector.
Liz Smith.
I'm very grateful for that response, Minister. The Minister will know very well just how important Kinross Curling Club has been over the last 350 years and the support that that's given not just to the community but to national and international bonspiels. But they have been really struggling in terms of COVID-19, and unfortunately they were not able to access the 10 million Digital Boost Development Grant because that was so oversubscribed. So can I ask exactly what extra support the Scottish Government is able to provide to curling?
Marie Goujon.
Well, I would say that the package that we announced and the £2 million of funding, that's in addition to Sport Scotland funding, which had been made available, and I think there was £1.5 million available through that, a COVID recovery support fund, and that was provided support for the governing bodies, and I think that there was around between £600,000 and £700,000 of investment to Scottish Curling, which was given in a couple of instalments last year. But I would say that we are continuing engagement with the sector, with the and with Sports Scotland and the governing bodies to see what further help and support we can provide, because I realise that right across sport there are huge challenges there. That's why we have tried to assist as much as we possibly can in relation to the financial package that we've already given.
And question number 8, Gail Ross.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government what mental health and wellbeing support is available to expectant women and new mothers.
Claire Haughey.
The Scottish Government is committed to ensuring equitable, coordinated access to mental health provision for new mothers and their families throughout pregnancy and during the postnatal period. We know that looking after the health and well-being of mothers is vitally important both for them and their children, and can contribute to breaking the cycle of poor outcomes from early mental health adversity. This is supported by a £50 million investment over 4 years, which is being overseen and directed by the Perinatal and Infant Mental Health Programme Board. We are working with all health boards across Scotland to establish and expand specialist perinatal services, and this includes specialist community perinatal mental health, infant mental health, and maternity and neonatal psychological intervention services. Initial staffing for these developments should be in place by the end of the financial year, and we are working closely with boards going forward to develop these services further. Midwives, health visitors and GPs are often the best sources of advice and support with regards to mental health and wellbeing. Health visitors play a vital role in the health and wellbeing of children and families in our communities, and they are at the core of delivering universal early years services.
Gail Ross.
I thank the Minister for that answer. Caithness Health Action Team have reported that the travel from Caithness to Raigmore Hospital in Inverness and being many miles away from home and family is negatively affecting some women's mental health. They advocate the use of the model currently operating in Orkney for maternity services. Will the health team work with NHS Highland and others to ascertain the pros and cons of this model for Caithness?
Claire Hockey.
It's essential women in Scotland, including those in more remote and rural areas, receive a safe, high-quality service from the NHS. We continue work with the maternity transport groups as part of the Best Start, and this is an expert group examining the transfer of pregnant women and newborn babies. As part of this group, specific consideration is also being given to the pathways and protocols for remote and rural transfer across Scotland. The Best Start North Steering Group has been established by 4 boards in the north of Scotland and is overseen by NHS Highland and NHS Grampians Chief Executives. The group are seeking to understand the resources, the constraints and challenges and the opportunities in the current systems, and we welcome the conclusions of the group.
May I have a quick supplementary and response, please, from Maureen Watt?
Thank you, Premier. Additional support can be so important to the well-being of both parents and a newborn child, even more so during COVID. A constituent of mine whose partner works away from home is really feeling the strain. Is there a non-familial support bubble that she can form to access the support she needs?
Claire Hockey.
We recognise the difficulties that new parents, particularly mothers, face in terms of developing informal relationships with their peers at this time. However, there are measures in place to ensure that those who are more vulnerable do continue to get access to support through whatever means is most appropriate, for example, peer support for mental health. They will also continue to have access to universal services such as maternity services and health visiting to further aid access to any local community supports. But we do not propose adjusting the existing guidance for this group at this time.
Thank you all. That concludes questions on health and sport, and we'll now move on to the next portfolio, which is communities and local government. Again, could I ask if any member wishes to ask a supplementary to any question posed, please put R in the chat box. I have question number 1 from Fulton McGregor.
Thank you. Officer, to ask the Scottish Government what measures in its draft budget will help build the resilience and well-being of Scotland's communities.
Cabinet Secretary Eileen Campbell.
Thank you. The published draft budget proposes a range of measures important to resilience and well-being, recovery and renewal for our people and communities, including support for jobs and skills, businesses and health services. This includes £100 million for the Green Jobs Fund, £98.2 million to improve digital connectivity, and £1.9 billion for primary health care to help deliver more services in the community. Other measures include £81 million committed to regeneration programmes for the next financial year, such as the £13.6 million Empowering Communities programme, which enables communities to tackle poverty and inequality on their own terms. The budget will also provide investment in the local and national third sector infrastructure, supporting the capacity and growth of social enterprises.
Fulton McGregor.
I thank the Cabinet Secretary for that answer, and particularly welcome the recent investment in North Lanarkshire Council and across Scotland from the Regeneration Capital Grant Fund. As well as mitigating the impact of UK government welfare cuts, what other actions is the Scottish Government taking to tackle deep-seated poverty and inequality?
Eileen Campbell.
Thank you, and the member is right to point out the amount of work that we do to mitigate, and I don't think that rests easy with us. We don't want to always be mitigating the acts of another government, But the activity that we take on our own terms includes that we've committed over £500 million to protect people and communities impacted by COVID, provided over £200 million to local authorities in consequential funding. That includes increased investment in our Scottish Welfare Fund and in discretionary housing payments and for third sector community organisations across the country. The budget also continues significant investment to tackle poverty and inequality and to strengthen public services, including £23.3 million for our Tackling Child Poverty Fund and £68 million for the game-changing Scottish Child Payment, which begins payments for children under 6 later this month. Investment in this new benefit is part of almost £3.6 billion we're investing next year in Scottish social security and wider social support delivered via local government.
Supplementary from Alexander Stewart.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Ensuring local authorities are funded properly is key to protecting the well-being and rebuilding from this pandemic. The recent budget will still mean that councils will require to make cuts, for example, to organisations like Citizens Advice. These cuts will not be necessary if councils were given a fair deal, the type of deal suggested ahead of the budget last week. So if the Cabinet Secretary is not going to provide funding to Scotland's councils, what will she do to ensure that the government will protect and prevent vital services from being eroded?
Aileen Campbell.
Yeah, I've set out a number of ways in which we're supporting activity to help protect the most vulnerable that are most impacted by the actions of his government and the UK government, which includes things like not, for instance, uprating universal credit, which we have continually asked. So, for by all that, we have, as my colleague Kate Forbes set out last week, the budget for local government settlement is £11.6 billion, and that continues to provide local government with a funding settlement which is both fair and affordable. And the budget has several stages to go through, so if the member wants to suggest any further activity and any shifts on those budget lines, then he should engage with myself or with Kate Forbes more directly. And we will continue to work with our third sector partners, which includes Citizens Advice, to make sure that they can continue to deliver the advice and support and the help that is so necessary, particularly at this time. But we'll also always look to make sure that we can provide longer term funding to our local government and third sector, and it would be useful as well, though, if we were given that same benefit by the UK government in the way that they indicate their budget settlement to the Scottish Government.
Question number 2, Beatrice Wishart.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government when it last met representatives of Shetland Islands Council and what was discussed.
Aileen Campbell.
The Scottish Government engages with all local authority areas and health boards on a weekly basis as we work together to respond to the impact of the pandemic on our island communities.
Beatrice Wishart.
Thank the Cabinet Secretary for her answer. The islands are blighted by high levels of fuel poverty, and with many household bills stretched more than ever because of the pandemic, it seems like a problem that's only set to get worse. Unfortunately, people were left disappointed last week when the budget provided only a small increase in funding for fuel poverty and energy efficiency programmes, with no sign of the critical fuel poverty strategy. What action has the Scottish Government taken so far to develop a strategy, and will it be published in this parliamentary session?
Aileen Campbell.
Well, we take all those points very seriously indeed. The fuel poverty measures that were set out in the budget would also have included the winter support package, which included £7 million of funding, because we recognise how difficult this particular time of year is, and particularly so for those rural and remote communities that have not got the ability to link into mains provisions of fuel and heating. So we continue to invest, we continue to work with partners, we continue to support where we can to help enable people who have fuel poverty needs to be met. And I'm happy to engage with Beatrice Wishart if she feels that there are other things that can be done and activities that can be done to support her communities in Shetland and by default other communities across rural Scotland. But we are committed to tackling fuel poverty. It was set out within our fuel poverty bill. We set out measures within the budget. We've invested additional money through the winter support package, and we're continuing committed to responding to the needs of people across the country.
Question number 3, Alison Harris.
Thank you. To ask the Scottish Government what recent discussions it has had with third sector and community organisations providing out of school care services.
Aileen Campbell.
Thank you. We know that out-of-school care services play a vital role in enabling parents and carers to access work, addressing economic and social exclusion and providing improved outcomes for children. And this will be vital as we move out of lockdown and into recovery in the coming months. Scottish Government and the Minister for Children and Young People, Marie Todd, meet regularly with the Scottish Out-of-School Care Network, SOSCN, who represent the regulated out-of-school sector in Scotland, including third sector and community organisations. Over the course of the pandemic, Scottish Government officials have engaged directly with SOSCN members through online events. Discussions were largely focused on the impacts of COVID-19 for out-of-school care services. SOSCN have also played an active role in the Early Learning and Childcare Sector Recovery Working Group, and that group has helped to shape guidance documents and support packages for the childcare sector in response to the pandemic. There have been 17 meetings of the group, with SOSCN being represented at all, the latest of which was on the 4th of February, which is today. So SOSCN also represent the out-of-school care sector on the childcare sector working group.
Alison Harris.
I thank the Cabinet Secretary for her answer and acknowledging that out-of-school care services are vital for thousands of parents in every part of Scotland. But very worryingly, many of these services will not be able to reopen again when the time comes. Deputy Presiding Officer, when Scotland is able to get back to work, these services, including First for Kids, who are a charity in my region, will be vital to allow parents to get back to work. Can I ask the Cabinet Secretary what specific help will this government offer this sector to support these businesses and the jobs that rely on them?
Aileen Campbell.
Well, firstly, I want to recognise all the points that Alison Harris has highlighted, exactly illustrating why the out-of-school care sector is so important as part of the recovery. And that's why, as I set out in my original response, they have been so integral to the work that government has been taking forward to respond to current issues affecting the sector as a result of pandemic, but also thinking to the future about what does recovery look like and how do we support the sector. And there have been funding announcements throughout the course of the year, and I know that Marie Todd continues to take a keen interest in what more can we do to support this vital sector, to support people getting back into work when restrictions ease. For by that, my own portfolio has supported the third sector in terms of recovery as well, with the £350 million package that we announced in the spring of last year, with support going to a variety of sectors as well. So we'll continue to work with the sector, we'll continue to support the sector. Marie Todd has taken an active leadership role in that. But on that specific issue of the group that Alison Harris mentioned in her constituency, if she wants to write to us to look to see what other things we can direct them to, then I'd be happy to pass that on to my colleague if that would be helpful.
A supplementary from Gillian Martin.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I'd like to put my on record my thanks for all our third sector partners who've worked tirelessly through the pandemic. And ask the Cabinet Secretary how the funding announced in the draft budget will ensure that the third sector can continue to help people and communities recover from the impact of the pandemic.
Aileen Campbell.
Thank you, and I think what Gillian Martin has said there is absolutely correct. You know, the phrase that the SCBO use is never more needed, and I think the course of the pandemic has shown exactly that our third sector, our community sector, volunteering sector have never been more needed. The resilience of the country simply would not have been there had they been not enabled to step up and support communities across the country, preventing also a number of increased capacity issues, stretching capacity issues further for our statutory service. So they are hugely, hugely important, and we need to support them as much as we can. The draft budget announced that in 2021-22, 26.1 million will be provided in funding through the third sector unit to support the key infrastructure organisations that support that wider third sector network. But it's important to recognise that while that is an explicit line in the budget, that doesn't tell the whole story of support. Every portfolio, across every bit of government will have support in place to support third sectors in delivering their outcomes and ambitions. And also we are continuing, as we did set out in our programme for government, funding to support the third sector to respond to ongoing challenges to the pandemic, but also thinking about how do we help them and support them to recover. So that has had a significant resource put in place, and we continue to work with the third sector directly to ensure that if there are more things we need to do, if there are other actions and activities that we need to take forward, then we should do so with an agility that is very apparent in the third sector more generally. And I would also point out the Social Renewal Advisory Board's recent publication, If Not Now When, which also sets out a number of activities that government at all levels across the whole of public life need to take to ensure that we can reverse some of the inequality that our society faces and support our third sector to deliver on that.
Question number 4, Mary Fee.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government what action it is taking to reduce homelessness.
Minister Kevin Stewart.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. We have an ambitious strategy to end homelessness backed by a £50 million fund. We updated our strategy in October of 2020 following recommendations from the Homeless £500,000, support councils to implement rapid rehousing, and our Housing First Pathfinder programme has delivered over 400 tenancies. We have increased protections for people experiencing domestic abuse, replaced night shelters, and are making excellent progress towards our goal of eradicating rough sleeping. Our strategy is informed by the voices of those people with lived experience and steered by the Homelessness Prevention and Strategy Group, which I co-chair with COSLA's Community Wellbeing spokesperson.
Mary Fee.
Can I thank the Minister for his answer? The reality is that the extension of the unsuitable accommodation order for all homeless persons has twice been delayed, and the affordable housing budget has just been reduced by £132 million. These actions by the Government are hampering efforts to reduce homelessness. Does the Minister agree with Shelter Scotland that building affordable housing should be the cornerstone of Scotland's recovery out of the pandemic? And will the Scottish Government reverse the cut to the affordable housing budget?
Kevin Stewart.
Presiding Officer, I do agree that housing should be the cornerstone of our recovery. And we have invested heavily in social and affordable housing during this parliamentary term, and we will continue to do so in the future. What I would say to Mary Fee and to other colleagues is that in terms of our budget, we have faced a cut from Westminster of £218 million in housing consequentials. We have faced a cut of 66.5% in our financial transactions, amounts to £312 million. If Mary Fee and other colleagues want to join with me in calling on Westminster to reverse those cuts so that we can consider supporting housing to a greater degree here in Scotland, I would welcome that. So I would appeal to all members to join with us to say to the UK Government that this is not good enough and we want that money back.
Question number 5, Edward Mountain.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government when the Communities Secretary last met the Chief Executive of the Highland Council.
Aileen Campbell.
Thank you. Ministers and officials regularly meet representatives of all Scottish local authorities, including Highland Council, to discuss a wide range of issues as part of our commitment to working in partnership with local government to improve outcomes for the people of Scotland. We continue to work closely with local government and COSLA on our strategic approach to suppressing COVID-19 outbreaks, including regular engagement with all authorities about levels of restrictions and protective measures that apply. And I last spoke to the Leader and Chief Executive of Highland Council on the 11th of November.
Edward Mountain.
And I thank the Cabinet Secretary for that answer. Officers in the Highland Council have the right to emergency powers as a result of the national lockdown. With plans in place for the relaxing of the lockdown restrictions in late February and March, do you believe that now is the time for democratically elected councillors to resume control of local councils?
Aileen Campbell.
Well, like I said, I've outlined a range of ways in which we continue to engage. We work in partnership with local government. We work in partnership with the umbrella body COSLA to make sure that the response to COVID-19 is appropriate, is proportionate, and is also suppressing the virus. We're in a global pandemic, the results of which are hugely harsh and traumatic, and councils across the length and breadth of the country, in my experience, have played a full and rigorous part in ensuring that we can keep our communities safe, that they have a full and active input into the decision-making process, and will continue to engage on that basis. I have, as I say, I engaged regularly and thoroughly with local government and done so through the umbrella body as well. In addition to that, our officials work and engage with COSLA and Solace to make sure that we're making these decisions on a collective and collaborative basis to suppress the virus, get our country, steer it through this awful set of circumstances to ensure that we can bring about some sense of normality back to people's lives as quickly and as safely as possible.
Question number 6, Mark Ruskell.
Thank you. To ask the Scottish Government what criteria it uses to extension of negotiations on planning conditions where only one party supports such a request.
Okay, now we seem to have little issues with both Mark Ruskell and indeed Kevin Stewart, the Minister from last time, so we'll do the best we can. Kevin Stewart.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. There is no set list of criteria for such consideration. This is because the circumstances of each case, including the elements in any planning obligation, are different.
Mark Ruskell.
It won't surprise the Minister to hear that I still have grave concerns over the farce at Park of Keir, where the developer has requested and been granted over a dozen fruitless extensions to negotiations. Is there ever a point when a Minister can say that a development proposal has had more than enough time to agree an application and must be rejected?
I'm presuming, Minister, that you heard enough of that to be able to respond. Kevin Stewart?
I had some difficulty, Presiding Officer, but I'll respond as best I can, and maybe Mr Ruskell, if I don't answer completely, can write to me. What I would say, Presiding Officer, is that we're aware that planning obligations can be a source of delay in the planning process, and we encourage negotiations to be conducted as timeously as possible. And I always urge everyone to be as cooperative and collaborative as possible in reaching a conclusion to negotiations.
Question number 7, Rhoda Grant.
To ask the Scottish Government when it last met with Highland Council and what was discussed.
Aileen Campbell.
As I have already intimated, ministers and officials regularly meet representatives of all local authorities, including Highland Council, to discuss a wide range of issues affecting our communities and to ensure that we can improve outcomes for the people of Scotland.
Rhoda Grant.
I wonder if they discussed the current Boundary Commission proposals and the cuts in representation to some of our most remote rural and island communities. Parity in Island Council areas has been set at one councillor for every 800 people, yet in Highland the parity level has been set at 1,800, and this will result in fewer councillors covering huge geographical areas and islands, creating a substantial democratic deficit. Can I ask what the Cabinet Secretary is going to do to ensure that the people in those remote, rural and island communities are properly represented?
Aileen Campbell.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. In terms of the review, the Boundary Commission and the review that Rhoda Grant described, I'm aware that my colleague Graham Day has written to the Council and is engaging with the Council on that issue. And we would certainly encourage all councils to fully engage and constructively with the Commission, taking the opportunity to articulate any concerns that they may have, and those concerns that will be raised by those communities that Rhoda Grant has articulated about. So I would point her to Graham Day. He's taken forward that work. He's engaging with Highland Council. But if there are things that she would like to alert me to on this issue, if there are things that we can be doing differently, if there are things in which she feels that her constituents aren't being able to proactively engage upon, then please let us know, and we'll make sure that Mr Day is aware of that, and that we can make sure that this review and this commission is as aware of local concern as it can be.
Question number 8, Christine Graham.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government what discussions it has had with Scottish Borders Council and Midlothian Council in the last 3 months.
Aileen Campbell.
Thank you. Ministers and officials regularly meet representatives of all Scottish local authorities, including the Borders and Midlothian Council, and we always, as I've said already, we discuss a wide range of issues as part of that commitment to working in partnership with local government and to improve outcomes for the people of Scotland.
Christine Graham.
I thank the Cabinet Secretary for her answer. Despite Borders Council receiving a 4.1% increase in the draft budget, the Tory leader of the council is full of complaints. That's not a surprise, especially regarding extra cash only if the council does not increase council tax. Is she right to complain about that?
Aileen Campbell.
Well, as I've said in previous answers, we've provided through the local government settlement £11.6 billion, and that continues to be provided local government with a funding settlement that we believe is fair and affordable. And of course there is a number of stages yet to progress through with the budget, but it also does include a further £259 million of non-recurring COVID-19 consequentials, which are based and provided to local authority on the basis that they have complete autonomy to allocate their agreed shares. So if there are specifics around the concerns that the leader may or may not have about her allocation, then she should let us know, let her colleagues know. They can then negotiate the budget settlement, but we have given and provided flexibility there so that she's able to allocate those resources how she sees fit. But we have provided a settlement to local government that is fair and affordable and delivers upon the shared outcomes and aspirations that we have for our constituents.
Thank you, everyone. That concludes portfolio questions on communities and local government, and we shall move on to the next portfolio, which is social security and older people. And again, can I ask that any member who wishes to ask a supplementary question, please say so in the chat box. And question number 1 is from Mark MacDonald.
Thank you, Presiding Officer, and I'll note my interest at the outset that I am a parent of a child in receipt of disability living allowance. To ask the Scottish Government what progress is being made in involving individuals with experience of disability living allowance in the design and delivery plans for the child disability payment.
Cabinet Secretary Shirley-Ann Somerville.
The Scottish Government has worked with people who have lived experience of the current social security system since powers over social security were devolved, including people with experience of disability living allowance for children. This includes our experience panels, our public consultation on disability assistance that received 189 responses from individuals, and extensive user testing of our systems and our processes. Their input has been vital in helping us to develop and deliver a system that is built on the values of dignity, fairness and respect.
Pat MacDonald.
I thank the Cabinet Secretary for her answer and also for the fact that she was able to meet with me prior to the pandemic to discuss these matters. She'll know from the correspondence and the discussions that we've had that I'm very concerned about the renewal process that takes place for disability living allowance for children, which often requires huge amounts of paperwork to be filled in. Can she say a little more about whether that system will be different under child disability payment, and is that something that will be tested in the pilot phase, which she announced in her statement in Parliament in November?
Shirley-Ann Somerville.
Can I thank Mark MacDonald for this question, and I can assure him that this is something that we are taking very seriously. This is an area which I know causes great concern to many parents and indeed to young people themselves, and this is why we are determined that it will be different. I have had recent contact with my officials on this issue. This is an area that we don't have to have complete for the pilot process, but we are aware we do need it ready for as soon as any young person is going to go through that process. In that case, there will be a lot of user testing that we will do to ensure that both young people and adults, as well as, of course, the stakeholders that may represent some of them, have been fully involved in that process, because he is quite right to say that the transition from child to adult services or to adult benefits can be an area where there is a great deal of stress, and we are determined, for example, to use as much information that we already have for a child to be able to assist them in that process of transition. And I will endeavour to keep Mr MacDonald updated on the progress we're making, and happy to work with him on this issue.
Short supplementary, please, from Jeremy Balfour. Mr Balfour, I'm afraid you are silent. I don't know why, it's not like you. But we shall perhaps try again. Jeremy Balfour. No, I'm afraid not, Mr Balfour. I'll tell you what, we shall move on somewhat, and given time, we can try again later to bring you back in your supplementary to question 1. So we'll go to question 2, and it's Stuart Stevenson.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government what discussions it has had with the UK Government regarding the retaining the £20 uplift to universal credit and working tax credit.
Leanne Somerville.
The Scottish Government has written to the UK Government on 5 occasions with requests to make the £20 per week uplift permanent and to extend it to legacy benefits. Most recently, the Cabinet Secretary for Finance wrote to the UK Government on the 27th of January, calling on them to announce the retention and expansion of the uplift in the March budget. Analysis by the Scottish Government indicates that cutting this support would move 60,000 people, including 20,000 children, into relative poverty in Scotland, and we will continue to urge the UK Government to make the required changes to ensure that the benefit process works for the people who need it and not against them.
Stuart Stevenson.
The Resolution Foundation said that if the uplift is cut, then 1.2 million people in the UK will fall into relative poverty. The Cabinet Secretary has just highlighted that 20,000 children in Scotland would be affected. Does the Cabinet Secretary therefore agree that, notwithstanding silence or failure to respond to 5 communications, each and every one of us should use every possible effort to draw the UK Government's attention to this catastrophe affecting too many of our young people and families in need right across the UK, but in particular in Scotland?
Leanne Somerville.
Well, I would agree with Stuart Stevenson that we need to all make every effort that we can to persuade the UK Government on this. We have consistently called for this change, but I'm also encouraged by the calls from both across the political spectrum and from third parties. So, for example, the All-Party Parliamentary Group on Poverty, co-chaired by a Conservative MP, this week published a report calling on the UK Government to maintain the £20 per week uplift and to scrap the benefit cap. There is wide support for this issue because people recognise and understand the impact that this will have to adults and to children right across the UK. And with that level of support, I really do hope that the UK Government will do the right thing and change tack.
I'm going to go back to question number 1 now with the supplementary from Jeremy Balfour. Thank you, Cabinet Secretary. Jeremy Balfour. I can hear you loud and clear. Yes.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. The Scottish Government have had 4.5 years to deliver the new social security system, and of course it is welcome that they have tested it and spoken to those with lived experience. But will the Cabinet Secretary now confirm that the system will be delivered on time and that there will be no further delays and no further excuses?
Leanne Somerville.
Well, I'm genuinely sorry that Mr Balfour continues to take this tone when we're discussing the implementation of social security. He will be well aware that the changes to the timetables that we have had is because of the impact on coronavirus, not just on the Scottish Government, but on the DWP, on the health and social care sectors that we heavily rely on our partners in local government. So we've now replanned for child disability payments and adult disability payments, as I announced last year, and I hope that we can genuinely work together across the Parliament to make sure that the implementation of the child disability benefit in Scotland is a success, and I hope that Mr Balfour would actually join in welcoming the progress that we are making under exceptionally difficult, challenging times.
Question number 3, Finlay Carson.
To ask the Scottish Government whether it will provide an update on how it supports older people.
Kellyanne Somerville.
Since the start of the pandemic, the Scottish Government has provided over £1.3 million in support for older people's organisations at a national level, as well as supporting local community projects which help older people. This includes £1 million for Age Scotland to expand the capacity of their free helpline, which provides advice, support and friendship to older people and their families. The Minister for Older People and Equalities continues to meet regularly with the Older People Strategic Forum, most recently last week, to discuss other ways in which the Scottish Government can provide support.
Finlay Carson.
Since the start of the pandemic, many of my elderly constituents are having to rely on technology considerably more, not only as our only source of communication, but for online banking and health services. And whirling the internet has increasingly become the only way to access these lifeline services. But not everybody has access to these tools to support their daily living and well-being at home. Even those with access to the technology may not have access to fit-for-purpose broadband or the skills to use these platforms. There is undoubtedly a growing divide between those able to access and those excluded from online support. Can I ask the Scottish Government what it is doing to support my elderly constituents in a rural area who suffer disproportionately because of poor or no rural broadband?
Kellyanne Somerville.
Well, the member is quite right to point out the importance for many older people and indeed other parts of the community of using digital communications during the pandemic. That's why the Scottish Government has the Connecting Scotland programme that's been delivered, for example, through the SCVO. There's been 189 projects supported so far, and 77 have identified themselves as supporting older people. The Scottish Government is also, for example, funding digital champion networks to ensure that it's not simply the devices that are being delivered, but also the ability, the encouragement and the training for older people and indeed others to use that technology. So this is something which we will continue to look at, as we do recognise this is very important to ensure that people have the ability to connect with others digitally if they wish.
Supplementary from Bill Kidd.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Cabinet Secretary, the cut to pension credit means older couples in Scotland could be £7,000 worse off per year. Will the Scottish Government please continue to push the UK Government to reverse this punitive cut?
Kellyanne Somerville.
I can assure Bill Kidd we will continue to do that. The Scottish Government fundamentally disagrees with the UK Government's decision to change the eligibility criteria for pension credit for mixed-age couples. This will have a grave impact on the incomes of many couples across Scotland. We have, of course, made representation to the UK Government on this matter, and we will continue to do so.
Question number 4, Brian Whittle.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government whether it will provide an update on what action it is taking to combat loneliness among older people during the COVID-19 pandemic.
Kellyanne Somerville.
I know ongoing restrictions are hard for many and can exacerbate or cause loneliness and isolation, which is a clear social harm we are all aware of. The Minister for Older People and Equalities meets with our Older People's Strategic Forum regularly, most recently, as I said last week, and receives updates from our stakeholders and their networks. Our £100 million winter funding package, for example, recently has invested nearly £6 million in promoting equality and tackling social isolation and loneliness, and this includes £4.3 million additional funding for the Connecting Scotland programme, which I mentioned in a previous answer, specifically to get an additional 5,000 older and disabled people online. We know that tackling digital exclusion is one of the best ways to prevent social isolation and loneliness.
Brian Whittle.
Thank you. Can I thank the Minister for that answer? And she will be aware that post-COVID it will be a community-based activity that will be crucial to tackle the increased loneliness and poor mental health due to the lockdown restrictions on our older people. So can I ask what the Scottish Government is doing to ensure that community-based activity is still available post-COVID to older people, and how will the Scottish Government help to promote these activities?
Leanne Somerville.
Brian Whittle's quite right to point this out. Digital exclusion is one aspect that we can tackle, but we also have to make sure that people have services available to them. One of the best ways we can do this is through the close contact that my officials, but particularly the Minister for Older People and Equalities, continues to have with large organisations and community organisations right across Scotland to ensure that she and her officials are hearing directly from them. This is an area of her work I know that she takes exceptionally seriously, and if Brian Whittle has some examples from his constituency that he would like to point out to the Minister, I'm sure she would be delighted to hear from him.
Question number 5, Gillian Martin.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government whether it will provide an update on the impact the Best Start grant and Best Start foods payments are having.
Leanne Somerville.
These payments provide vital support during children's critical early years and have been welcomed by families across Scotland, both in and out of work. More than 148,000 Best Start grant and Best Start food payments have been authorised, providing over £46.9 million to those families who need it most. The interim evaluation on Best Start grant showed that these payments have eased financial strain on low-income families and prevented some families from going into debt. Together with the Scottish Child Payment, over £5,200 of financial support will be provided for eligible families by the time their first child turns 6, and over £4,900 for second and subsequent children. These three benefits can be accessed through a single application, making it easy for eligible families to access the money that they are entitled to.
Gillian Martin.
I thank the Cabinet Secretary for that answer. Poverty is often hidden in rural communities, so more specifically, I'd like to ask for some detail on how the Scottish Child Payment and other Scottish Government assistance for families will do to alleviate child poverty in the North East, particularly at this very difficult time.
Leanne Somerville.
Well, Gillian Martin is quite right to point out not just the Best Start grant and Best Start foods, but also to the Scottish Child Payment. The applications, of course, for the Scottish Child Payment opened the 9th of November, and the payments will start for that payment for that benefit this month. We are keen to ensure that we are extending and encouraging eligibility for this as much as possible. This is an equivalent payment of £10 a week to families with eligible children who are in receipt of low-income benefits. And we as a government are determined to increase uptake, for example, by ensuring we are writing out to every eligible family that we have the contact details for. But I would encourage everyone, every MSP, to make sure that they're doing their utmost as well to make sure their constituents know about this payment. It is very important at this time that people do access this. It can make a big difference to people, and I'm sure Gillian Martin is doing her best to do just that in her constituency.
Question number 6, Deirdre Boyack.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government how the current benefit system can be used to support people who've been impacted financially by the COVID-19 pandemic and are currently not receiving the benefits that they're entitled to.
Leanne Somerville.
Statutory sick pay and low-income benefits such as universal credit are an integral part of the financial support available to people at this difficult time, and these remain reserved to the UK Government. We continue to call on the DWP to do their part, taking a more strategic approach to maximising the take-up of reserve benefits, retaining the £20 per week uplift to universal credit and extending it to legacy benefits, scrapping the two-child limit and removing the benefit cap. The Scottish Government is committed to maximising people's incomes, and this has been made all the more urgent, of course, in the context of COVID. In response to the pandemic, we've increased the Scottish Welfare Fund budget significantly to £57.5 million, launched a £500 self-isolation support grant for low-income workers who need to isolate, introduced a £100 million winter plan for social protection, and launched a £250,000 income maximisation marketing campaign aimed at low-income families.
Sarah Boyack.
Can I thank the Cabinet Secretary for her answer? I particularly welcome the fact that there's additional publicity being made available so that people can apply for what they can benefit from. I know that's something that lots of support organisations are keen to see. Can I ask the Cabinet Secretary what consideration the Government has given to extending the eligibility criteria for the discretionary housing payments, an important issue for renters and homeowners who've seen their incomes plummet during the pandemic?
Shirley-Anne Somerville.
Well, we continue to work very closely with local authorities to see what can be done to ensure that there are no gaps in our provision to protect people at this difficult time. We've made particular significant budget increases to both the Scottish Welfare Fund and discretionary housing payments. We'll continue to work, as I say, with local authorities to ensure that that's meeting people's needs.
Supplementary, please, from Rona Mackay.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I welcome the extension of the £500 self-isolation grant to people who earn less than the living wage. How will the Scottish Government ensure that people are aware of the support they're entitled to receive?
Leanne Somerville.
As I mentioned in the debate in Parliament yesterday, the Government is determined to ensure that people are aware of the support out there, not just financial but also the wider support. And that will include, for example, national and local media campaigns to promote this. But we're also very keen to ensure that people exactly at that time of need are aware of their support. So we're looking at what information can be included when, for example, there's community testing ongoing, and also to ensure that proactive calls are made to people who allow their details to be given to local authorities when they phone Test and Protect, to ensure that the local authority can proactively phone that person, not once, but again during their isolation period, to offer them both financial and that wider support to ensure that everyone knows that there is support out there for them at what we know is a difficult time during self-isolation.
Supplementary from Shona Robson.
Thank you. Given that around 85% of Social Security is still reserved to the UK Government, does the Cabinet Secretary rather, agree that the UK Government needs to have a benefit take-up strategy to ensure everyone can get the support they're entitled to, particularly during this very difficult time?
Leanne Somerville.
Well, I think Shona Robson raises a very important point. The benefit take-up campaigns that the Scottish Government are running are not just about our benefits, but encouraging people to ensure that they're getting all the support that they can get. But there is also a responsibility on the UK Government to do the same, and I think there is much more they can do. In fact, that's not just me that thinks that, but I wrote with my colleagues from Northern Ireland and from Wales, encouraging the UK Government to look very seriously at actually doing a benefit uptake to ensure that people know the support, particularly as we know that many people who are needing support at this time are perhaps experiencing the benefit system for the very first time. Unfortunately, they do not to date seem to be willing to take up that offer, but I hope that they do in the future.
Question number 7, Kenneth Gibson.
To ask the Scottish Government what its social security priorities are for financial year 21-22.
Leanne Somerville.
As set out in the Scottish Budget, we estimate we will invest £3.6 billion for social security payments in 21-22 as we continue to establish a social security system based on dignity, fairness and respect. As well as mitigating some of the impacts of UK Government cuts, these funds will tackle poverty and support carers, young people and low-income families through a range of benefits. My priorities for this year will be to ensure that those who are entitled to the flagship Scottish Child Payment receive their support that they need, which we are backing with an investment of £68 million this year alone. The first payments, as I think I mentioned earlier, will start to families of children under 6 this month, and then we will continue the rollout of our disability benefits this financial year with the introduction of Child Disability Benefit.
Kenneth Gibson.
I thank the Cabinet Secretary for a comprehensive reply. Can she advise how many applications there have been for the £10 Scottish Child payment across Scotland and in North Ayrshire specifically? And I note that to further increase uptake, the Scottish Government is writing to eligible families. By which date will this exercise be completed?
Gillian Somerville.
Well, I'm happy to say that according to our management information, as at the 31st of January, there have been 73,000 applications for the Scottish Child Payment across Scotland. The latest official statistics show that at the 31st of December, so a slightly different time frame, that there had been 1,810 applications from North Ayrshire. We are absolutely committed to maximising take-up, as I mentioned in an earlier answer, which is why we are writing out to eligible families, and that will be completed before the benefit opens officially in the middle of February.
Question number 8, Liam Kerr.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government whether it will provide an update on the delivery timetable for the 3 disability payments.
Gillian Somerville.
As I set out to Parliament in November, our first Scottish disability benefit, the Child Disability Payment, will be piloted in the summer this year and rolled out fully from the autumn. This will be followed by Adult Disability Payment, our replacement for the UK Government's Personal Independence Payment, which we will pilot next spring and roll out fully by the summer. This is of course all subject to the continuing impact of the pandemic on our partners in delivery, including the UK Government, local authorities and of course health and social care. We continue to work closely with colleagues in the DWP to replan delivery of the remaining benefits with this in mind.
Liam Kerr.
I thank the Cabinet Secretary for answering. Now, in the Cabinet Secretary's statement in November that she referred to, she said she'd held discussions with the health and social care professionals needed to introduce the child and adult disability payments. So can the Cabinet Secretary provide an update on when all such relevant professionals will be in place and in a position to ensure the benefits can be rolled out? And separately, does she have a timeline for when precisely the pension age disability benefit will be introduced?
Gillian Somerville.
Well, we are on track to have all the healthcare professionals that we require in place for the pilot and then for the full rollout of the child disability benefit. So the member can be assured that we are continuing to work very closely with the health and social care sectors to ensure that we are able to deliver the benefits, but also cognisant of the pressures that they continue to face because of the ongoing COVID pandemic. On the aspects around pension age, I'm sure Liam Kerr will appreciate and understand that the pandemic is still ongoing and therefore still impacting and affecting, in the original answer, not just the Scottish Government but the DWP, health and social care professionals who we will of course require for all our disability benefits in different ways. We're continuing to work with all our partners to ensure that we have the most up-to-date information possible. But again, this is an ongoing pandemic and we will do what we can to provide that information to Parliament and to members as soon as we and the DWP have agreed what is a joint timetable for the delivery of the remainder of the programme.
That concludes portfolio questions on social security and older people, and we'll now move on to the next item of business.